Beautiful. So I'd love to introduce our beautiful facilitator for this Boundary for Nice People masterclass, Susie Pettit. Over to you, Susie.
Thank you so much. And well, I'm going to share my screen. And my name is Susie Pettit. I am let's see if you, no, I want to do that again differently. Hold on, sorry. You don't need to see my notes too. We're going to share my screen with let's see. My name is Susie Pettit. I can probably say this in my sleep. There we go. Without thinking too much about it. I am a certified life and wellness coach. I work with women on mostly their stress and overwhelm, and I help them learn habits to love their lives. I've been doing this for over, oh my goodness, I'm 51, so more than 20 years. And I work primarily with people one-on-one or in a group. I have a Love Your Life school. Today, I am thrilled to bring you a masterclass on boundaries and 3 different things that we're going to be talking about, because these are the things that have the potential to really change your life and strengthen all of your relationships to feel more ease. And that's what I want for all my people, more of us to have ease. I went through a life that I will not get into here, but what Faith briefly touched on, of where I did not feel I did not feel ease at all. And this is how I got into boundaries and all the work that we're going to talk about today. So the terms, hopefully you can see this, boundary setting for nice people. We're going to work with 3 things today. Okay, emotional intelligence, codependency, and boundaries. And it's possible you've heard of one or all 3 of these. It's probably why you're on the call today. And I'm going to ask, for the sake of our learning, that you try to throw out what you know about those 3 things and come today with as much of an empty mind as possible. How nice. Just sort of empty out our brain and be here with me today, because the way that I like to teach about these terms are ways that will empower you and help you feel more free. Whereas sometimes they're spoken about in a way that feels sort of heavy or almost punitive, like something that we're doing to other people. And that's not what I want for you. So let's go. Starting with emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is what it sounds like. It is having intelligence or knowledge about our emotions. Okay. So having knowledge about our emotions and where they come from, the word emotion, energy in motion, is a good hint. Okay. Emotions are a physical energy in our body. So I like to sort of break that word out, like emotion and energy in our body. It's something that we feel. Like right now, my body's feeling all tingly and like almost lit up because I am like energized to give you this talk. That is an emotion in my body. The word is energized. The feeling is like this buzzing energy. So the first part is to recognize that our emotions are physical energy and motion in our body. They're things that we can actually feel, similar to a tummy ache or a toothache. Okay. And this isn't a masterclass on how to feel feelings. That's a whole other one that I encourage people to do. And I totally could come back and talk about the different energies in our body. And I bet you've had people on here before. But what we need to think about in terms of emotional intelligence is getting intelligent about what the different feelings feel like in our body, because they feel different. So like, what does disappointment feel like versus anger, okay, versus fear? These are all things that we're getting more intelligent about our emotions. Okay. The part I want to focus on with emotional intelligence, okay, is back to where I just said emotional intelligence is where emotions come from and how to feel emotions. We're going to focus on the where emotions come from. Okay. Emotions come from our thoughts. This is not really supported in society, but it is. I won't go all geeky and brain sciencey on you, except to say that it is scientifically proven. When they look at a thinking brain under a brain scan, a thought looks like a bright flash of light. It's like and we have 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. So our brain is like flashing when it fires these thoughts. And then from those flashes, emotions look like rain coming down. So first we have the thought, and then we have the feeling. The challenge is that we have those 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. So sometimes our thought fires so fast that it seems like our feelings happen first. Yeah, like our feeling is caused by something outside of us, but this is not the case. Our feelings are caused by our thinking, which is actually very good news because it puts us more in control than we think. Okay, we are taught that it's the things outside of us that cause us to feel what we're feeling. Like society wants us to, this is how consumerism survives. Like we are taught that like, oh, the new car will make you feel better, or that new pair of pants will make you feel better. Or, or we're also taught like that short-tempered husband is what makes you irritated, or the medical diagnosis is what makes you feel a certain way. It's not accurate. Our thinking comes from our thoughts. It is our thinking about the things in our life that cause us to feel what we're feeling. Okay. And I like bringing this up first and foremost, because like, why does it matter to know this and to sort of be like sort of pedantic and particular about that our feelings come from our thoughts? It's where our freedom lies. It is where our freedom lies. So 2 parts. First, it helps us feel more in control of how we're feeling. Okay. This just happened to me. Like you wake up on a morning, have a day full of plans, pouring rain, and I'm drinking my morning coffee and I'm like, oh, I'm feeling a little blue, like a little like, ugh. Knowing that my feelings come from my thoughts allows me to pause. This just happened Monday. It was just sort of like drizzly rain. And I was like, I wonder why I feel blue. Okay. I can share that I stopped and realized that it was because I was sitting, like while I was drinking my coffee, my brain was running this thought that's like, oh, your day is ruined. Today's going to stink. Like it was just, I wasn't really paying attention to it, but like, that's like the soundtrack in my brain. It was like, your day is ruined. Because I had a day planned. I was going to be, walking with a friend and I was going to read on the beach later. And then I see that it's raining and then my day is ruined is what I'm thinking. And then I'm feeling a certain way, icky. Same morning, later in the morning, I catch up with my husband and he is like all psyched and like bubbly. Why? Because he's thinking a different thought. He's a gardener. He loves our outside garden. And he's like, oh, it's been a while since it's rained. I'm so glad our plants are getting, and he's like all buzz. Is it because of the rain? No, it's our thoughts. Okay. So the first way that it's so helpful to start to tap in to that our feelings come from our thoughts is this sort of just awareness tool with ourselves, not as a way to like beat ourselves up. Like, oh, Susie, you're blue because you're thinking that thought. More just like oh, that's so interesting. I'm feeling blue because I'm thinking like my day is ruined. Sort of, I don't know if you noticed right then, but I was sort of like laughing at myself when I realized I was thinking that. That sort of levity and kindness with ourselves goes a long way. Okay. The second way it helps us is in our relationships. So when we understand and really practice and start to really like conceptualize emotional intelligence, we feel less responsible and lighter in our relationships. Because if our feelings come from our thoughts, it makes sense then that the other people in our lives, their feelings come from their thoughts too. Like our husband being mad. Why is he mad? Because of his thoughts. How about our mom being disappointed? Why is she disappointed? Because of her thoughts. This can be a little mind-blowing at first when we hear it. So I just want to stop and like check a second to see if anyone has any, I can't even see the chat box anymore because I don't know what I did, but if anyone, like if you already sort of knew this about emotional intelligence, just the intelligence of what your feelings feel like, or also if, you've sort of been aware of that our what I'm trying to say, that our feelings are caused by our thoughts.
I think that's a great thing, Susie. I love that emphasizing that the emotions come from our thoughts. I think that's a really useful piece of information because we know it's not something that's happening outside of us, but it's actually because of the thinking, the way attached to the things that are happening outside that elicits the specific emotion. So I really love that clarity. So thank you.
For sure. Yeah, great. And I do like that, like lightness with it and to be kind with ourselves. It's not then about using this knowledge as like a weapon against ourselves that like we always have to think happy thoughts then. No, because we have a human brain and the human brain is going to be unmanaged. They, studies show about 50% of the time. So 50% of the time, we're going to be able to sort of be mindful and intentional. And other times our brain's going to run off and be thinking this thought like the day is ruined. And it's like, oh, okay, funny brain. Oh, nice. And we're going to feel that way. So it's helpful to bring that kindness and levity with ourselves. Okay. And so if our feelings come from our head, from what we're thinking, then who's responsible for them? We are, which it brings us to the next point that we're thinking about, the term codependency, because often we get sort of trained to think that we're responsible for other people's feelings. Okay. So the fancy word for this is codependency, that somehow we feel responsible for other people's feelings, or my definition here is feeling overly responsible for someone else's feeling or life experience. Okay. And it's just thinking like maybe you've thought the thought, I don't want to hurt his feelings, or I don't want to get him angry, or I don't want her to be disappointed. Okay. When we bring what we now know about emotional intelligence into those thoughts that we're thinking, and we can agree that like, okay, our thoughts create our feelings. I can see how Susie's thinking this thought about the rainy day and her husband's thinking this and that, etc. Okay. Yet we sometimes don't cross that over into our boundaries because the conditioning has been so strong that we are responsible for other people's feelings. And so this is where today, just like maybe you feel your chest constricting and like, no, that's not true, to just try to stay open a little here to see that, yeah, you know what? I can see how I've been inclined to feel responsible for other people's feelings in our lives, to feel responsible for how they feel. Okay. That yet when we remember emotional intelligence, like they feel what they feel. Why? Because of how they're thinking. Okay. So codependency is really important. Codependency is not something that we're striving for in our relationships. It is something that when you are in codependent patterns, which most of us are, because this is sort of the society we were raised in, it's going to feel heavy and responsible. And heavy is really the way that it shows up for me. Like I just feel responsible for, I have sons, and when they're coming over for dinner, like if I'm feeling responsible for their fun time, or I'm feeling responsible for the girlfriend's time when she's at my house, or that's how codependency comes up. Okay. So another definition I've heard of codependency is giving someone or something outside of us control over our emotions. So sort of that, like if my son does have fun at dinner, then I get to have fun. But if he's having drama in his head and he's not having fun, like me taking his emotional experience on can just feel it. I mean, talk about disempowering. It's like giving someone or something else outside of us control over our emotions. Okay. I need to be very clear here with all of us big-hearted women that this doesn't mean that we don't care about how other people feel. So there is a big difference between caring how they feel and taking responsibility for how they feel. And this is where I like to pause and give some real world examples, because it is like the difference between empathy and codependency is that's where the freedom lies. So this just happened with one of my clients yesterday. It was just so perfect timing for this masterclass. So she has a broken wrist. She actually, poor thing, has a broken wrist and a broken ankle, or like it was just a poor thing. Anyhow, she has broken parts of her body and her husband asked this weekend, he asked if there was anything he could do to help her out for the upcoming week. Okay. And she said it would help a lot if he went grocery shopping. They have 2 young kids, and, it would be really nice if she didn't have to figure out how to grocery shop with like her boot and her hand. So he went to the supermarket, and when he came home from the supermarket, he was in an emotional state. He had energy and motion running in his body. He came in and she said that he like sort of was slamming the bags down, and the market was crazy. It was so frustrating. There were so many people there. There were a lot of things out of stock. Okay, so he's just having his emotional experience. And here's the difference between empathy and codependency. Empathy looks like her saying, wow, that stinks. I hate it when the market's like that. I'm sorry, hon. Like she's totally like, yeah, that's hard. Codependency looks like her saying, I'm so sorry you went. I should have gone. Or it's also what might happen in her head involving some sort of like should phrase. I always say, like, stop shoulding on yourself. Like, I should have gone. I shouldn't have asked him. I should have done it myself, etc. Okay, so I want you to start to see the difference there between like empathy, we can understand and be kind and like, yeah, that stinks, versus taking responsibility for it. Another example that happened just this past weekend with one of my sons. He was going to come for dinner on Saturday. So he called midweek last week and said, hey, Mom, can we reschedule? Some of my friends are going to be in town and I would love to get together with them. Okay. First, I checked in with myself and I was like, hey, is it okay? Like, is it okay? And I was like, yeah, you know what? It is okay. I haven't rescheduled anything. I didn't, I haven't done any prepping or planning of the meal. So I said to my son, sure, have fun. Sounds like a great time. Okay. So can you see how that can strengthen relationships? He has something he'd like to do. He has been trained with me as his mother that he isn't responsible for my feelings. So he asks me if it works for me. So codependency is like us all sort of in this like mesh of like, he's responsible for my feelings, versus interdependence, which is what we're looking for, is this sort of trust of the other person to be honest. Okay. And so he has something he'd like to do. He doesn't think he's responsible for my feelings. So he asked me if it works for me. And he trusts me to check in with myself and be honest. I tell the truth that it doesn't bother me. And then in my head, I don't think victim-y thoughts like, or I don't think victim-y thoughts like, oh, he should have done this. I think non-victim-y thoughts like, what a nice and open relationship we have. Or I was thinking that thought, I'm so glad that my son has made friends here because he's new to Australia too. Okay. It could have been different. Certainly when I was younger, it would have gone differently. So first of all, he could be afraid of my reaction. He might think he's responsible for my actions, for my emotions. So he could have even said something ahead of time to his friends. Like in his head, he could have been like, oh, I said yes to my mom. And if I call and cancel, she's going to be disappointed and maybe she'll be lonely Saturday night. And so instead, I'm going to say no to my friends. And in reality, we all here know on the show, like, how does that show up? Okay. Maybe he's more withdrawn at dinner with her, with me, and I'll have no idea why. Like, it's sort of like in his head, it's like, oh my God. Okay. So then like I'm sitting there at dinner and he's more withdrawn because he wants to be with this. It just adds all this drama into our relationships that is not needed. So I want to pause here again, because codependency is something that I just really like to bring awareness to in terms of no shame. Because this really is the water we were raised in. Like, I mean, even as far back as like, first years of primary school, it's like, don't make Johnny mad. Like, we're being taught that we can make Johnny mad. So anyone, I'll look at the chat. There is some chat here. Anyone have anything they want to talk about or in terms of codependency?
Thanks, Susie. I'm loving this, but I'm just wondering, so say you had made plans, you had planned, prep the meal and everything, and you're caught in this dilemma of, you were really looking forward to it. You'd maybe put another plan off, but you don't want your son to miss out on this situation. Like, I would always go, yeah, I'd say to my son, yeah, definitely you go out, because I would not want him to miss out.
Mm-hmm.
I would have that little bit of resentment. But so what would you do in that situation? I might do, not towards him, but towards the situation potentially. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. And resentment, I mean, I'm so glad you brought that up, because resentment is the feeling that we often feel when we don't speak up for ourselves, or that, another term that's thrown around is sort of this people pleasing, when we're like, oh, yeah, that's fine. Like we're trying to be pleasing to him, but I like calling people pleasing people deceiving. Like, I'm saying it's fine, but it's not fine. So in that situation, I might say like, oh, wow, man, like I totally get it, but I've already like canceled a plan with my friend and I already bought the meat for Saturday night. So is there a way? So I'm honest, first off, to answer your question, like I'm showing my true self. And maybe then we sort of work together to problem solve using both of our brains. Like, is there a way that you could still see your friends and come over for dinner with me? And maybe but we open it up. I don't sort of behind the scenes solve for something that he doesn't even know is going on in my head. It's this, another whole, I work a lot with relationships. And one of the things with relationships is I say clear, concise communication, sort of telling the whole truth. I'm just like, oh yeah, you know what? Like, I totally hear that. That is hard. And I've planned this thing. So, it's sort of like, what are we going to do? And then it's more open, and then I don't find myself as much in resentment. Now, I don't want to overshadow this part that will feel difficult to your nervous system, probably, because we've been programmed to be like, oh, it's fine. But the word fine, I love fine, because I always say fine stands for feelings inside needing expression. So usually when I say fine, I'm like, it's fine. And then I'm like slamming stuff around, and I'm just like, hold on. So part of this is just sort of practicing speaking up a little more in an open way. And maybe how that would turn out, Katie, is I might say to him like, oh, bummer, like I canceled a plan and, and I already bought the meat. So, no. And then he's like, one of us is going to feel disappointed, but it is this guideline for him. Maybe next time he's more conscientious when he says yes to me. Like that, it's sort of like a domino. You guys have the game dominoes, right? Like it's sort of this, like, we never know what it's going to do down the line, but helpful to see like, okay, in this moment, when I hold my guideline, which we're about to say sort of a boundary, it's like, no, you said yes. So let's do it. Then maybe the next time he's like, yeah, you know what? I'm Saturday night usually doesn't work for me, Mom. And then we move forward from there. All of this work is like a little bit of a dance.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to move on because this is perfect. Thank you. And to boundaries, which is, we just sort of tapped on it here. And boundaries are a thing that sometimes when we hear about them, certainly it's like the hot topic in the social media world and wherever, sometimes it comes off as a more negative thing, like something we're doing to someone else. And they have a feeling, boundaries it's like more aggressive or mean than they need to be. And I just like to give my definition of boundaries, which is a guideline for how you will be treated. Okay. A simple way to think about boundaries are like, I love thinking of like a little instruction book for how we want to be treated. Okay. So a couple things with boundaries is you don't need to say your boundaries out loud. You don't need to explain your boundaries. And other people don't need to agree or understand your boundaries. So I'm just going to leave that slide up for a bit and give you some examples again, because this will help. Like some of that is like, what do you even mean? Okay. But one of the boundaries many of us have, a little instruction book for how we should be treated, a guideline for how we should be treated, is probably that we don't allow people to hit us. Okay. So with that boundary, do you see how I don't need to say that out loud? Meaning, like when I got on this masterclass, I wasn't like, hey, I'm Susie Pettit and I don't allow people to hit me. No. Now, if someone were to hit me, I also don't need to explain my boundary to them. I don't need to explain why I don't allow people to hit me. Okay? I also don't need to get them to agree with me. I simply speak up, say, or more realistically in this case, I probably call the police, and that's my boundary. That is a guideline. That's an example of a guideline that many of us have sort of in our instruction book. And that one's sort of easy to see how, like, oh yeah, no, you don't need to say that out loud all the time. Okay. You don't need to explain it. Someone hits you. You don't have to be like, actually, that crosses my, no. And you don't need them to understand. Maybe they obviously think it's fine to hit someone. They just hit you. So how about this one? Okay. I have a guideline, my little introverted self. I have a guideline that I like people to call or text before coming over. Okay. This isn't one that I have to say out loud. But back in the day, my mother-in-law would routinely come over unannounced. So I did need to say it out loud because we have different instruction books. So I said, my mother-in-law's name was Marty. And I said, hey, Marty, I like getting a call or a text before people coming over. So I like knowing when people are coming over. The next time before you come over, can you call or text first to see if I'm free? That was uncomfortable, like what we were just talking about with Katie. Like that was uncomfortable for my nervous system to say it first. Then I said it. Okay, so for some people in my life, I don't need to say that boundary out loud. Like I had a friend, Kimberly, she always called or texted before coming over. So maybe she had the same little instruction booklet, but not my mother-in-law. And that's okay. That's where we get out of the drama with boundaries. Like you let my mother-in-law be my mother-in-law. She doesn't think it's necessary to send text or call. And Kimberly be Kimberly. Kimberly does. We don't have to get into the drama of it or the judgment of like right or wrong. Or sometimes we get into this like explaining where we're like, but it's because I'm an introvert. And it's because it's like, we don't have to get into that. We just state our boundary, our guideline for how we want to be treated, and we let her be her. And one of the things that often happens with boundaries is that when you're starting this sort of new behavior, or maybe you've been like the people pleaser, or no, it's fine that you came over without announcement, and whatever, for many times, is she's used to us being that certain way. And so then the first couple of times when you set a boundary, the other person's gonna like think you're kidding or or forget or ignore it. And that's what my mother-in-law did. So she would come over to my house and I would say, hey, Marty, it's good to see you, but I can't visit. Next time, can you call or text if I'm free? Okay. She lived about like 25 minutes away. So that was uncomfortable. It's not like she just came from down the block. Very uncomfortable to my nervous system, and took about 3 times of me doing that. And then she began to text and call, and you know what happened in our relationship? So much friggin' better. I like, because otherwise I would feel like, and I loved that Katie brought up the word resentment, because I would feel resentful. She'd be over, like she'd come to my door and she'd be like, is now a good time to come over? And I'd say, fine, and I'd have my fake little smile on, and I'd be so irritated, whatever was happening, whether she's playing with the kids or it just totally bothered me. That's not helpful for the relationship. I'm not being truthful. So I also want you to notice what I didn't do. So when my mother-in-law comes over and I say like, hey, Marty, it's good to see you. Like next time, can you call or text? I didn't give all these words. Like I didn't. So that second part there, I didn't explain my boundary. I didn't say like, I'm in the middle of doing my laundry right now, or I'm in the middle of prepping dinner right now, or whatever. Because one, it doesn't matter actually, whether I'm in the middle of dinner or whether I'm sitting and staring at a wall. Like I like to have text or calls beforehand. But when we do get into that sort of like excess explaining or engaging with them, we give them the opportunity to like, it's just like we're giving them an out. So if she comes over, it's like, oh, Marty, actually, I'm in the middle of doing the laundry. She totally could be like, okay, I'll come in and help you. Okay. Or, hey, I'm coming over, I'm in the middle of dinner. She's like, no problem. I'll watch the kids while you're doing dinner. She's still crossing the boundary. It doesn't help. So the less words we say, the quicker the boundary is usually adapted. Okay. So it's helpful. Another example and I'll take a break after this to see what examples you guys have. You can think of places where you feel resentful or irritated. But another one where you may see why explaining or defending your boundary isn't necessary. Another boundary or guideline that many of us have is that we don't allow strangers to touch our body. Okay. And say you have a daughter or a granddaughter or a daughter-in-law, she's at a party and a man puts his hand on her bottom. A boundary would be saying, take your hand off my bottom. She could take his hand off his bottom. She doesn't need to explain her reasoning. She doesn't need to see if he agrees. She has a guideline that she will not be touched by strangers. Done. End of story. Okay. He may say, what's the big deal? In the same way, my mother-in-law may say, what's the big deal with just coming by? And that's them. They can have their opinions. They can have their way of acting. This is about you. Okay. They aren't something we're doing to someone else. Like I'm not doing it to my mother-in-law. I'm doing it for me. I will take a pause. I have another example, but I want to see if I see there's things in the chat.
Susan, do you mind if we close the share for a moment so we can see everybody?
Yeah. Do I do that?
Yes, because you're sharing on your end.
So smart.
There you go. So I wouldn't mind sharing my example. This is an example I use quite often, which is I have a couple of friends that I give a spare key to my apartment with. So I like people to have my spare key. I have one friend that every time she comes to visit me, she will use the key and enter. And I feel so violated, and I've had to say to her, this is a spare key for you to hold for me. This is not for you to enter. And I need to know if someone's walking into my home. I need so it took me a while because I felt like that's a bit mean because you gave her a key. So I understand that, and I had to just go, it doesn't matter. My body feels so rageful when she did that. That was my indicator that it was a violation.
Yeah. Well, and that's such a great example. Thanks for bringing it, because she clearly is like when we feel the rage, and then we like, what usually happens is we make this whole story up in our head about like, how could she, and what is she thinking? And like, literally, she just might be like, oh, of course, like if I gave Faith the key, she could just pop in anytime. Like, it's totally fine with her, no problem. But it's not okay with you. So we just remove that drama where we're like, oh, she must not know. It's okay. Anyone else have any examples of, I love here how Sarah says she let go of a very codependent friendship with the narcissist. The narcissist, so narcissism I love addressing, because narcissism, we have emotional intelligence, which is what we were talking about, this idea that our thoughts come from our feelings, and we, intelligence, like intellectual intelligence, is like we're always learning about our emotions and what they feel like. And so there's this spectrum. Okay. And so we're sort of in this emotional maturity, we're learning about ourselves and all this. The other side of the spectrum is emotional immaturity, where we think other people cause our feelings, and we're in codependency, and then right on the other side of that is narcissism. So we have a lot of people who show up as, I work with a lot of people with narcissists, and a lot of people are true narcissists, that they truly, like a narcissist doesn't have empathy and can't get into that thought of like what it feels like to be you. But we also have people that are so incredibly emotionally immature, and they're just continually like attributing their feeling, putting their feelings outside of their body with you, or thinking someone else causes their feelings, that's also what we're seeing. So helpful to bring all of what we're learning today into all of these wonderful relationships that we have.
I actually care for a child who has borderline personality disorder, and it's a daily struggle. It really is, creating boundaries when someone has a mental illness. Mm-hmm. So yeah, very interested in how you do.
A daily struggle, and it's like imperative. Like it is, and that's the thing with boundaries, and that's why this last slide that I showed, and I'll screen share again, that they're not something we're doing to someone else. They are something, and they're not something that we're doing only when a relationship is faltering. Boundaries are part of all healthy relationships. Like I grew up in a boundaryless house. I was married first to a man I had no boundaries with and was constantly codependent and all the drama. And now I'm in a marriage where boundaries are a part of our life and our dynamic, and it's the healthiest, most thriving place to be. So we just need to sort of readjust how we're thinking about boundaries, that there's something that we do if something's broken, or something we do like punishing someone else. I'm going to go back to screen sharing because my next example will help with that if it lets me. 100%. And an example of, okay, I think you can mostly see that. Yes. Okay. An example that I had with my parents. So I have a boundary now that I won't allow people to yell at me. Okay. At different times in my adult life, particularly when I decided to divorce my first husband, that man that I was talking about, my mom and my dad would yell at me. They would call me up and yell about how I was making a bad decision. They would invite me over for dinner and yell at me in front of my kids about how I should listen to them and do things their way. Okay. And before I did boundary work and learned about emotional intelligence and codependency, I would let them. I would say things in my head like, oh my God, this is not like, it would be worse if I say something because what are the kids going to think? And like, oh, okay, my dad's just on the phone. I would just sort of get wrapped up in that. And yet once I worked with a coach and learned that I could have standards for how people treated me, that I'm not doing something to them. Okay. I can have standards for how people treat me, even my parents. I started speaking up for myself. So this was one of the first places where I set boundaries. And I said like, hey, mom and dad, I don't allow people to yell at me anymore. Okay. If you keep yelling, I'm going to hang up the phone. Or if you keep yelling, I'm going to get up from the table and go in the other room. And then I would. To say that my parents were surprised would be like a complete understatement, because at that point I was probably like 40. So they've had 40 years of me doing what they tell me to do. Okay. When the first boundary I set was on the phone. I said, Dad, if you keep yelling, I'm going to hang up the phone. And when I first hung up, I think he called me back 14 times. That's okay. The beauty here is, and I want us to hold on to this, I wasn't telling them how to act. I wasn't shaming my mom or dad by saying they shouldn't yell at me, like, or telling them what to do or not to do. Or this is the beauty about boundary setting, the way that I help people set them, is that it's much more peaceful. And it's also more peaceful in my own head. So I'm not in all this, like, my parents are wrong. What kind of parent yells at their kid? Or like, what does this mean about me? No, I'm just like, oh, right. They don't know about my guideline, like Faith. It's like, they don't know about my guideline about the kids, about my friend having a key. Okay. My parents, up until now, now I have this new guideline for myself. And so they could actually keep yelling. I'm not telling them what to do. They could keep yelling at the disconnected phone. I was just saying they can't yell at me. Okay. My mother-in-law could keep visiting her neighbors without sending a text, or visiting my sister-in-law without calling. That's none of my business. Totally fine. This is about guidelines for how we want to be treated, and not shaming someone for their actions or trying to get caught up in the convincing them your way is right. Okay. So when setting boundaries in long-standing relationships, I just need to pause always here. Like I just said, I was setting some boundaries with my parents. It is so important to have support. People around you who know about emotional intelligence, codependency, and boundaries. Like knowing that boundaries are part of a healthy relationship. Okay, groups like this, like with Faith, the Silver Sirens, are paramount, because when we're setting boundaries, like maybe when we're saying something to our son, like, actually, I already bought the meat, so let's just keep our plans. Next time, maybe if you tell me far enough in advance, great. Okay, that's going to feel super uncomfortable to our nervous system. And so we want to have groups around us to reinforce, like, hey, you're not doing anything wrong. It's normal. Like the woman here who said, like, she just broke up with a codependent friendship. We are going to be trained, like, we are responsible for that person's feelings or their, and it's like, no, we're not. It's okay. So it's super important to have supportive groups around. Okay. It's also super important to listen to different ways of thinking. So podcasts like mine, I have a podcast. I have a codependency quiz that I like to give people, and I'll give you guys the link that Faith can include, because it sort of shows you maybe where your big areas of possible growth for setting boundaries are. Okay. Any sort of like, other podcasts or talking to people in this group, or like where people get their information, and expanding your intelligence on emotional intelligence. This isn't something that I touched with, but our generation, they didn't even know about emotional intelligence they found out about it in the 70s. Then they didn't start really like investigating it and researching it in like labs and stuff until the 80s. And then in the 90s, it started to tap into some of the most like advanced schools. But really, right now, this generation of kids, sort of in like, kindy on up, they're starting to get more of that, like, tell me what you're feeling. But we weren't taught it. And so to have some support around us that we're not going crazy is really helpful. Okay. I want to bring in some discussion, but I'm a coach and I love giving action steps. And so I just like leaving people with like 2 things that they could do. One of them is I love like sort of getting out a notebook and starting writing a little instruction book of you. Like sort of brainstorming, what are some guidelines you have? Because one of the problems we get into with boundaries is we think that everyone thinks like us. Like, it doesn't sound like Faith got into this trouble, but her, like, the trigger of like, why is she just letting herself in with the key? Like, she doesn't think like you do, clearly. So when we can sort of step out of that and be like, oh, not everyone thinks like me. Not everyone thinks they need to send a text before they come by. Or not, and just getting a little more comfortable with like what kind of guidelines we have. Like, what are the things that, a place to look where I like to, I do have a little like instruction manual for Susie. When I'm thinking of these things, I think of like, where am I annoyed or frustrated or resentful? But this feeling of like, and so I recognize for me, one of them is like when we started talking the call about people being late. So when, like I say, I'm getting together for, with someone at noon and they don't show up till 12:20. And they're like, hey, sorry, I was at the market. And I'm there like, I'm fine. You know, that's a boundary for me. So if I have a friend that's routinely showing up late, and I might say to her next time, like, hey, you know what, time is important to me. And it like, so if we say 12 and you're not there by 12:15, I'm going to leave. Okay. Or time is important to me. So sometimes I notice like you show up late or like late, like what time do you think you're going to get there? Because then I'll get there at that time instead of both, you know, us thinking it's going to be 12 or something. It's just, again, that clear, concise communication. Have the things that are in your head come out of your mouth in your relationship. So starting to think of that like a guideline or a book, or like, what are the things that matter to me? What are the things that irritate me? And thinking of that, okay, super helpful. And I forgot where I was going with that. I had another exercise, but my other exercise, I think, was just to think, and this would be a separate journal entry of in which relationships do I feel irritated or annoyed? Annoyed is a very big emotion to show that like a boundary has been crossed. So when I feel annoyed, it's almost like a light on the dashboard of our car that's like, boundary's been crossed. My next question to myself is like, have I said that boundary out loud? Or is it one of these that, you know, I'm assuming other people know it's okay to yell at me, or it's okay to come by unannounced, or it's okay to be late for lunch, or it's okay to cancel your plans the day before. Like, have I said that out loud? Have I been true and honest with my relationships? So I mentioned I have a podcast that can help you with some of this learning. I'm so glad I made this slide. I forgot that I had that smbwell.com/CODA. CODA stands for codependency. That'll get you to the codependent quiz, which is awesome. I think that's just like a neat place to start. I love quizzes myself. I'll take any survey anyone wants to send me, but it's a fun place to start because, like, say you probably will rank high on some of them because we all were raised in this culture, but some of them more than others, it can be this area. And I encourage you to just sort of be like, oh, okay, that's an area I could work on if I wish. I'm going to stop the screen there so I can see if anyone has anything to say. Oh yeah, this people draining us dry, the exhaustion, the emotional exhaustion comes from codependency, comes from us thinking we're responsible for other people's feelings. And it is this period of just like stepping out of that. And I love, Sarah, that you mentioned menopause, because that's one of the things they talk about prometrium being our people-pleasing hormone. And so when that goes away, sometimes we're like, yeah, well, I gave you the key, but don't use it. Like, we're more able to say what we want to say. But part of why I label my masterclass, or I have a podcast called Boundaries Without the, I don't know if we're allowed to swear here, but I say the itchiness, right? So boundaries without the bitchiness is that when we're not speaking up, and we're not having these little moments like saying to my son, like, actually, I've already bought the meat. So since you told me you were coming, I'd like you to come. If we don't speak up that builds and builds and builds until we get to this point where we're like, oh, and our life, we're like, what is going on? And we're like, oh. So it is helpful to slow that down. I'd love to hear. Anyone have relationships or areas where they think they could work on this, or success stories?
Yeah, I love that. I just wanted to just say a quick comment before we jump in. You know, I love what you said about us not being authentic with people. If we don't tell people what's okay, we're not being authentic with them. And it's that cliche, we teach people how to treat us. And if we're constantly saying yes, when we mean no, we're actually being very dishonest. So I love that. So thank you.
Yeah, I do. People pleasing is something that many of us were raised to do, like be the good girl and just say, you know, but I like calling it out for what it is. It's lying. Like you are, and many of us who are like trying to be good, we're like, oh, I don't want to lie. But like we are, when we say it's fine with that fake freaking smile on our face, like it's not fine. So let's say it's not fine. And that's also why I like saying people pleasing is people deceiving. It's this like, and I know that when I was doing a lot of people pleasing when I was younger, one of the main things that came up for me was this feeling like no one really gets me. Like, why isn't anyone like this, like not being understood? That's a good sign of people pleasing. They don't get you because you're not showing you, like you're not showing them who you are.
And so they can't read your mind.
They can't read your mind. I know. So we got to get the words out of our mouth, which can be hard.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Susie. So who would like to go? Who would like to share? Okay, I'm going to go to Katie. Oh, okay, go Chanel. Did you want to go?
Well, it is because you said like in your second marriage, you've got really good boundaries with each other, and I'm going to start dating, and it's like, how do you approach that? It's just, I know because I'm so used to being single. I know that I just think, how do I approach this so that I do have good boundaries and I'm not in a situation where I'm letting someone fully take advantage of my space and think, what the hell am I doing? So how do you, I mean, I guess it's me, do I set a boundary with my first walking into a relationship? And then when do I like say, okay, here's my boundaries, and if you overstep, there's the door, peace.
Yeah, so that's such a great, I'm so glad you brought that up, because we don't want to go in and be like a scroll, like here are the 1,400 things you need to, because they're like running out the door, you know. It's like, and so I think for you, because I had a period between my marriages, a long period where I was examining myself, and I would start with this little instruction booklet for you, because we want to look at like what's important to you. What I find with many of us is it's not really as many things as we think. Like you wouldn't really have 1,400 things, but it's some main things that maybe, you know, like I know one of the boundaries for my husband is he like cannot stand it when people come in and wear their outside shoes in the house. So like, that's just something. Now that's not something, if he told me that on our first date, I would have been like, dude, what is up with, like, we're not even in your house. Like, so we want to be aware, sort of the more general things. And then also our own tendencies. Like I like looking at past relationships and looking at where I was irritated and just noticing with myself, it's like, oh, why didn't I say something initially? So like, that's when it's like, when you spot it, that's the opportunity to say it out loud. I also, one tool that I can give you that's very helpful, because I brought up the shoe thing, and that like, I don't think it would have been a relationship breaker if I was wearing my, you know, trainers inside the house. So there are things that are relationship breakers. Like I have the boundary that I have the guideline that he should not sleep with another woman when I've never had to say that to him, but it's like some of these are unsaid. But for some of these things that are more wishy-washy and more like preferences, we use a scale of 1 to 10. And so he'll say like 10 is high, 1 is low. And he's like, hey, it's like about a 9 for me when people wear shoes in the house. What's it for you? And I'm like, I need to wear shoes in the house because my heels hurt, but I'm at like a 1 as to whether those are my outside shoes or not. So we sort of get into the conversation with that. Or like, you know, maybe there's something, and this is what we bring with our past relationships. It's like, okay, it's really, you know, like a 10 for me if you're on your phone when we're eating dinner. And he's like, okay, good to know, you know, I'll be at a 1. It just is a helpful, like practical way to have a conversation about some of the things, maybe sometimes that we're making assumptions in our head that it's a big deal or it's not. But really, I'm sorry, one more thing, Chantel, because this is important. We have codependency over here where we're taking responsibility. Like you might not say something about him having his stuff around your house or her having her stuff around her house because you don't want to hurt her feelings or his feelings. That's codependency. We need to speak up because it's not fine for you. And we say something like, you know what, like I like space. I like clean space in my house. And this is something, you know, so that's codependency. The other side of it is interdependent. And it sort of shows up as this, like, I don't need anyone. Like I'm, you know, this like ice queen, like I'm good. I don't need help. But like there is a medium of interdependent. And that is sort of, I call it like 1 + 1 = 3. So it's like Susie takes care of Susie's needs. My husband's Paul takes care of Paul's needs. I'm not responsible to meet his needs. He's not responsible to meet my needs. And when we're honest together, we're 3. So even like the example I gave with my son, like I'm responsible for taking care of my needs. My son is responsible. He's an adult now, is taking care of his needs. And together we're stronger.
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking for, this interdependence. And it's going to look different for all of us. But just wanted to
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Who would like to go next? Oh, Tass, go for it, Tass.
I think the thing you raised about, I guess, the fear of hurting somebody's feelings, but also potentially it might be something that's been annoying you for years. So it's built a fair bit of momentum. It's festered, and then to kind of tell somebody, let's say, use the talking on the phone when you're together, which is something I loathe, and that when you finally bring it up, it's challenging to go to do it in a way that's not causing offense.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, well, is that codependency? Because whether they're offended or not is really their problem, when the reality is I haven't behaved very well either, because I've just been putting it up with it for all these years, you know. And
Yeah,
a bit like you and your
great.
mother-in-law and the key holder faith.
Yeah. That's where I said, like, boundaries without the bitchiness, because we get in that bitchy if we bring all of our past to the current situation. Like when we bring the past to the present, so I love that example. And one thing I would say is, like, you need to work through your own thoughts first and your responsibility. Like you sort of touched on it there. I like to do like a journal or have a session with your coach of like, oh my gosh, what? And some learning there, sort of like with Chantel, it's like, let's learn as to like this responsibility of ourselves in a kind way of like, oh, this is so interesting. This has been going on for 20 years. I wonder why I haven't said anything. Well, maybe I thought that I'd be hurting his feelings or hurting her feelings or and just having some compassion for ourselves there, but recognizing that it's a complicit, like it's the two of you have been working that dynamic. And then when we come to this new situation, definitely thinking that you can offend the person is some of the codependent or not emotionally intelligent. I actually have my thought model behind me. So our thoughts are caused by our feelings. I don't know if you can see that, but that is the emotional intelligence model, that circumstances happen in our lives. Our thoughts are caused by our feelings. And right here, I should tattoo this to my face. Thoughts caused by our feelings, and then we take action. So if we're thinking the thought, like he shouldn't be on the phone, we're feeling resistant, then the action is going to be more reactive. So we just want to, like, him being offended is going to be his thoughts. Now we can sort of like influence him being offended if we come at it in a aggressive, like, you've been doing this for 30 years and not taking our responsibility in it. More what it looks like is us saying, like, you know what, I just am like realizing I've never said anything about this, but it really bothers me. You being on your phone when fill in the blank. And I'm wondering if we could start with, like, at dinners, we don't go on our phone, or, when we're on walks, you don't look at your phone, but owning it first. So starting not with the, like, you've been doing this for 30 years, because maybe, like, if Faith hadn't said anything to her friend coming into her house, and then she's like 10 years later, she's like, why are you coming to my house? Her friend's like, why would you say anything? How can I be faulted?
Yeah. And what else I don't like about you is
So I like saying, like, leave the past in the past. Like, that's work to be done with, your coach or your therapist, and we work through that. Come to the present with present, irritations. But, like, notice when I was setting that guideline with my parents, I wasn't like, yeah, and you yelled at me in June. I mean, I certainly could have, but, like, that's past. Here we are right now, and you're yelling at me. What am I going to do? I'm not going to waste my time talking about how, I didn't speak up for myself or you did. It's like this emotional drama for us too.
Yeah. So if you just leave it in the moment, that's where the weight starts and finishes. Whereas if it's that particular occasion, it's not the cumulative.
Yeah.
irritation.
And I just, one thing here, and I'm sorry to be talking fast or cutting you off, because I just want to add this in here. One thing that sometimes comes up with people is this, like, but you didn't used to say that, or that you never had a problem with this before. Like, they bring the past into it. And this is where I say the shoulder shrug is magical. And I'm just like, yeah, I've changed my mind. That kills my kids. They're like, you can't change your mind. I'm like, actually I can. I just did. Like, that's no longer acceptable here. But it's this, like, them like, but you've always let me talk on the phone, or you always let me, take your car without asking. It's like, yeah, I totally have. And I've changed my mind. Look at that.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Susie.
So hard.
Beautiful. As we're going to be boundary setting, it's 11 o'clock. Susie, are you okay for one more question? If not,
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so everyone looking after themselves, you're welcome to jump off if you like, but Susie is willing to take one more question. So anybody wanting to ask Susie a question? Yeah, Pia.
First of all, thank you, Susie. Loving what you're saying. Definitely resonates. It's how I work as well. Interestingly, what I find coming up when you do approach with the look, my feelings are from my thoughts and yours are from your thoughts, and that sometimes the pushback from the general community or the people personally in your relationships can sometimes be but like, you know, what does that mean if people are behaving badly? And then if you're just saying it's all in your head and you're thinking it kind of thing and it's all on you, isn't that letting people get away with, you know, really shitty behavior? I'd love to hear how you respond to that.
Yeah, can you think of a specific example?
Well, okay, let's say, for instance, it's always easy when you talk personal relationships, like partnered relationships. If, say, for instance, you're saying, well, you know, your partner, they didn't turn up to an event that they promised to go to, and you've brought it up to them and said, look, you know, that really upset me, and they turn around and go, well, that's, yeah, but well, that your upset is your upset. It's got nothing to do with me, kind of thing. And then you can't. So I've had, you know, I hear questions. Then people go, well, then what do you do with that?
I think that's wonderful. So that's a great example. So the circumstance is like he doesn't show up when he says he's going to show up.
Yeah.
Okay. You're thinking a thought that's making you feel upset. 100%. It's not him not show. Like some people might not show up and we're like, it's your thought that this and that thought might be like, this isn't what the guideline for me in a relationship. Like when someone says they're going to show up, I want them to show up. So when I say I'm upset, I very much would start with I was upset that you didn't show up last night. And he might say, well, that's your thought that's causing you to feel upset. It's like, yeah, it is. And I recognize it's because I have this guideline in relationships that I want people to show up when they're going to be. And so I am upset.
Yeah.
It's sort of just holding like, yeah, I am thinking this way and I'm still going to hold true to that thought. One of the things with thoughts, and obviously this is sort of a quick masterclass, but thoughts are just sentences in our head. I like thinking of them as like those little Chinese fortune cookie things. They're just all these floating sentences in our head. I don't like to get into so much whether the thought is right or wrong. Like, oh, you're wrong for thinking that, or I like to get more into, is the thought helpful or unhelpful?
Yep.
And in this case, you have a partner, they don't show up, or a friend who doesn't show up when they say they're going to show up, and you're thinking a thought like, this isn't how I want this relationship. I'm going to say that's a fine thought to have. Like, it's not always about choosing these thoughts that are going to land us in like the fairy cloud of rainbows with unicorns dancing around. It's like, no, like we're not lowering our standards just to do thought work. It's this actually, like, I'm in this relationship, and part of being in a relationship with me is that when you say you're going to do something, you do it.
Yeah.
Speaking to that. And so I'm allowed to be upset.
I love that. Yes. And then how they respond to that again is them, but you then have the choice of what you do with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you. It was more that it's really handy to sort of be able to articulate when others come and go, well, yeah, but what if kind of thing, and they're then still getting very caught up in the yes, but it's them causing my feelings.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, thank you so much. It's been wonderful masterclass. Thank you.
I'm so glad. Yeah, send me any of your questions on email or whatever. Sarah had a question too, Faith. I'm fine going over if you are, but I'm
gonna respect my boundaries. Which
okay.
Is my boundaries is that's it. So thank you so much.
Perfect.
And I love the whole boundary thing, and what Pia was saying too. For me, it's about setting your rules of engagement. These are the rules of engaging to me. These are the rules for you to have the access to the very best part of me. Otherwise, I get a bit grouchy.
Yes.
So yeah,
that's when it comes up. I just oops, I put the wrong thing in there. It's CODA with an A.
But I will share the information. So if you can email those all to me, I'll share it with everybody.
Yeah, and that'd be great. And Sarah, you can even email me your question. I'll get to it. I love boundary work. It is how you feel more free and how your relationships get better in life. So thank you everyone for coming.
And it's always safer to be in relationship with people that can set boundaries. I always feel safer with my friends that have good boundaries than the one that just agree to everything. Much safer with boundaried people. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, so thank you all. Thank you. Thanks, Susie.
Set boundaries in Australia, ladies.
Thank you so much for this beautiful, informative workshop, masterclass. I got so much out of it. Thank you.